A black man goes undercover. In a luxury store, the racist owner kicks him out and gets karma. The next day, he owned the building, but they treated him like he didn't belong. No spotlight, no entourage, just a quiet black man in a weathered jacket, stepping into his luxury store, and being told he wasn't the type. But what happens when the man they misjudged isn't just a customer? Stay with this story. It starts with a watch, but ends with something far more timeless. He wasn't dressed for the role he played in the world. No polished cufflinks, no sleek Italian suit, no gleaming car parked out front with tinted windows and valet expectations. Just a man, middle-aged, black, quiet, wearing a well-worn baseball cap and a jacket that had seen one too many New York winters. His shoes weren't shined, his jeans weren't tailored, and yet the building he stood in front of bore his fingerprints, quite literally. The cornerstones of this store had been laid with his vision, his money, and his name. And no one inside knew who he was. That was intentional. Jackson had built his business from the ground up, not on the back of generational wealth or flashy marketing gimmicks, but with grit, vision, and a belief that luxury didn't need to be loud. He'd been the outsider enough times in his life to know how the game worked. He knew what it felt like to walk into a room and be scanned, assessed, and written off before a single word left his mouth. He also knew that sometimes the only way to find the truth was to step out of your title and into the shoes of someone who holds no perceived power. So he returned, not as the owner, but as a shadow of himself. The store hadn't changed much. Still the same soaring ceilings, marble floors, soft jazz threading through the air like perfume. The glass displays were still cleaned twice daily, every fingerprint wiped away before it could linger. Jackson had designed this place to feel like stepping into another world. But now, he wondered, whose world had it become? He wandered toward the center display, where the most exclusive timepieces were showcased. Platinum bezels, alligator straps. Swiss precision movements are so rare that they are not commonly found online. And he paused in front of $122,000 in quiet perfection. He remembered the meeting where they'd chosen it for the collection, the way it caught the light just right, the symbolism of time as legacy. But as he reached forward to examine it more closely, a voice stopped him. "Can I help you with something?" Jackson turned. The man approaching wore the store well, crisp suit, tight smile, a particular posture that came not from pride, but from practiced superiority. His name tag read Jackie, though it might as well have read Gatekeeper. "I was just admiring this piece," Jackson said, nodding to the watch. Jackie didn't look at the watch. He looked at Jackson, looked through him, took in the jacket, the shoes, the cap. "That model's quite exclusive," Jackie said. "Most clients usually browse the other side of the case." It wasn't said with malice. That was the art of it. Politeness with a blade beneath. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You think I'd be more comfortable with something less expensive?" Jackie's smile tightened. "It's just that we try to guide our customers based on their preferences and what we've found to be a more realistic fit for their lifestyle. Their lifestyle, not his." That phrase hung there, like a bad perfume that wouldn't dissipate. For a moment, Jackson said nothing. He didn't correct him, didn't pull out a business card, didn't flash a bank statement. That would be easy and meaningless. He was here for something more profound. "I see," Jackson said. He placed the watch back down gently, as if it might break under the weight of what had just been assumed. It would have been tempting to leave it there, to turn and walk away with righteous anger. But Jockson had lived long enough to know that anger doesn't always change systems. Exposure does. So he stayed, he browsed, he observed, he noted the way Jackie hovered only near specific clients, the subtle glance exchanged with a younger associate when a man in work boots entered, the way his tone changed from client to client, depending on the brand stitched into their coat. When Jockson finally exited into the fading daylight, he didn't walk like a man dismissed. He walked like a man who had taken notes. His mind was already at work, not on spreadsheets or sales figures, but on culture, on values, on legacy. Not every man who wears wealth wears it on his wrist, and not every gatekeeper deserves the keys. The next morning, Jockson didn't return to the store. He returned to headquarters, wearing the same jacket, the same cap, the same shoes. But this time, every person in the boardroom would recognize him, and this time, he would be the one asking the questions. There are moments in a man's life that feel eerily quiet before they erupt. Not in volume, but in consequence. Jockson stood at the window of his office on the 39th floor, watching the city below move like a bloodstream of strangers. He had spent his whole life building something that mattered, a name, a standard, a place where luxury wasn't just the price tag, but the way a person felt walking through the door. The events of yesterday were still sharp in his memory, though not surprising. He hadn't come back to the store to be reminded of injustice. He had known it still lingered in places people refused to admit. No, he had returned to see whether the culture he'd once dreamed of had survived success. It hadn't, but he hadn't acted on impulse. Jockson never did. Emotion was a fire that could cook a meal or burn down a home. He had learned that lesson too many times. So he waited, thought, watched, and now he had a plan. At precisely 9:58 a.m., his assistant opened the door. "He's here," she said softly. Jockson gave a single nod. Jackie entered the conference room with the casual confidence of a man expecting a performance review, perhaps even praise. He wore the same well-pressed suit he had worn the day before. The only difference was the setting. Gone were the display cases and curated lighting. Gone were the assumptions and scripts. This was Jockson's territory. But Jackie didn't know that yet. He offered a polite smile, perhaps rehearsed, in the elevator. "Good morning. I understand we're discussing store performance." Jockson didn't smile. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." There was a long silence, the kind that makes a man re-examine every decision he made that week. Jockson leaned forward, fingers interlaced, elbows on the table. "I was in your store yesterday." Jackie blinked. A pause, a frown, then that careful smile again. "Oh? I didn't see you come in. I hope the visit went well." Jockson let the words hang between them for a beat, too long. Then evenly, "You didn't recognize me because I wasn't wearing a suit." Now the smile faltered. Jackie sat back in his chair, something shifting behind his eyes. Uncertainty, or worse, realization. "I watched you," Jockson continued, his voice calm but unmistakably final. "I watched the way you served some and scanned others. I watched as you smiled at those in silk and barely acknowledged those who walked in with humility. I watched how you measured people not by what they said, but by what they wore." Jackie opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it again. Jockson stood and ambled to the window. "You know," he said, not turning around, "my father used to shine shoes 3 blocks from that store in the 60s. He worked nights cleaning offices to afford my textbooks. He told me once, 'Son, the hardest part about being poor isn't the hunger. It's how invisible you feel.' He turned. 'Yesterday you made me feel invisible. In my store.'" Jackie stood abruptly, Mr. Jackson, I swear to you I didn't know—" "That's exactly the problem," Jackson interrupted, his voice still even. "You needed to know who I was to treat me with respect." There it was, the raw truth, not shouted, not performed, but laid bare, like the final move in a chess match. "I don't run a business built on intimidation or fear," Jackson continued, "but I built this company on something you no longer recognize: dignity, for every client, for every staff member, for every person who steps through that door." Jackie looked down at the table, suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. "You're not being fired today," Jackson said, voice soft now. "That would be too easy. Today you're being given a mirror. You'll go back to that store, not to lead, but to serve. You'll stand at the front and greet every person, every child, every janitor, every grandmother, every man in scuffed boots, the same way you'd greet a billionaire. And you'll do it for 30 days. Jackie looked up, his voice cracking. "And after that?" "After that," Jackson said, "we'll see if you've learned what luxury means." There was no anger in the room, no vengeance, just the unsettling clarity that comes when power is used not to punish, but to teach. Jackie nodded once, hollow and humbled. As he left the room, Jackson remained at the window, watching a city that never stopped judging. But today, he had nudged it an inch closer toward justice. The morning sun broke gently across the storefront's windows, casting long streaks of gold over the glass displays inside. Jackson stood just beyond the door, this time not as a silent observer, not in disguise, and certainly not invisible. The cap was gone. The coat was replaced by a tailored one. But what remained unchanged was his quiet gaze, measuring not inventory, not numbers, but people. Inside, the staff moved with polite urgency. Annie, the assistant manager who had stood unnoticed in so many meetings before, now carried herself differently. Not with power, but with clarity, with purpose. She knew what had happened. Everyone did. They had heard whispers, then confirmations. The man from yesterday wasn't just a curious shopper. He was the man who signed the leases, approved the budgets, and most importantly, believed in respect as policy, not suggestion. What none of them knew yet, not even Annie, was what Jackson would do next. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't call for attention. He walked in, unspoken, unexpected, and began engaging, not as a CEO, but as someone who wanted to see if fairness had a pulse here. He started with small things: a nod to a mother browsing jewelry with her teenage son, a question about a display that hadn't been updated in weeks, an observation about the lighting near the entrance, which left certain products in the shadows. Then, with the same calm presence that once shook a boardroom, he turned to Annie and asked her to walk with him. They stood near the back of the store where fewer customers lingered. Jackson looked at her the way a teacher might regard a student who just solved a problem no one else dared to touch. "You noticed what others ignored," he said, "and you didn't say a word. You let it play out. Why?" Annie hesitated, then spoke in that even tone reserved for those who've learned to listen more than talk. "I've seen situations like that before. I've worked in places where people like you, without the jacket and name, got less than they deserved. I wanted to speak up, but I wasn't sure if my voice would matter." Jackson studied her a moment longer. "It does," he said, "and now it has to." She looked at him, unsure. "I want you to run this place," he continued, "not just for the day, for the future, but not with the usual title or perks. I want you to lead like no one is watching, and still do the right thing." Annie blinked. "Me? But I'm not—" "You're exactly who this store needs," Jockson interrupted gently but firmly. "Not because you're perfect, but because you understand something Jackie didn't. Fairness isn't earned with wealth. It's earned with how we treat the people no one else is paying attention to." Elsewhere in the store, Jackie had returned, not out of obligation, but as part of the agreement Jockson had quietly offered, 30 days to greet every soul that walked through those doors. No assumptions, no status reports, just eye contact and humility. He stood now by the front, a man dressed the same as yesterday, but somehow smaller, as if shedding layers that once made him feel important. He greeted a man in paint-stained pants, without hesitation, offered a catalog to a woman with weathered hands, thanked a teenage boy for coming in, even when he didn't buy anything. Was it genuine? Jockson wasn't sure yet. Redemption isn't about perfection. It's about change you didn't think you were capable of. And sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, over and over again, until people start to believe it. Later that afternoon, Jockson watched from a distance as Annie coached a new hire on how to assist customers with warmth, not rehearsed charm. She explained that sometimes the man who walks in with dusty boots might be buying a gift for his wife's last chemotherapy session. The woman who keeps looking at the same ring might be saving for a proposal she's been afraid to make for 10 years. Sometimes people need to be seen to feel like they matter. As he listened, Jockson felt something he hadn't in a long time. Trust, not in profit margins or store metrics, but in people, in the ones who chose kindness when it wasn't expected, who respected others even when there was no spotlight. The store looked the same, but it no longer felt the same. When Jockson finally left that day, he didn't speak to the entire staff. He didn't issue mandates or slogans. He turned to Annie and said, "You've made this place honest again." She smiled, not out of pride, but out of understanding. And in that moment, the store didn't just sell luxury, it practiced it. Some truths arrive like thunder, loud, violent, unavoidable. And then there are others, the ones that tiptoe in on ordinary days, in ordinary voices, with the devastating weight of something you always knew, but refused to admit. The store had settled into its new rhythm. It didn't announce the change, but you could feel it in the way the lights seemed warmer, the greetings more sincere, and the air less filtered by pretense. Customers noticed. Some couldn't put their finger on it. Others said it outright. "Feels different in here," one woman told Annie as she wrapped a pair of modest earrings. "Feels kinder." Annie smiled, not because she sought recognition, but because she knew exactly what had changed, and she wasn't the only one watching. Jockson returned quietly one afternoon, not in disguise, not in power, just as himself. He drifted through the store like a man walking through his memories, seeing the space not for its products, but for the people it housed. And what he saw, more than displays and sales numbers, was a subtle shift, a humility returning to a place that had once, unknowingly, become too proud. Jackie was still there. His 30-day assignment hadn't ended. But the man Jockson saw today bore little resemblance to the one who had sized him up by his shoes just days before. Jackie still wore the suit, but it no longer fit him as snugly as it once did. His posture had softened, his tone had lowered, and most notably, he had stopped performing. Jockson watched as he approached a teenager with torn sneakers, showing genuine interest. "Looking for something special?" he asked, "not to sell, but to serve." The boy shrugged. "Just, looking." Jackie didn't press. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be nearby." It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. Change, Jockson knew, was rarely instant. It was earned in the slow drip of repeated effort. But what he hadn't expected was what came next. Annie approached him as he lingered near the watch display, the same case that had once held a $122,000 watch and a silent humiliation. She was holding a piece of paper, her expression somewhere between steady and uncertain. "It's a letter," she said, "from Jackie." Jockson took it but didn't open it immediately. She continued. "He said it wasn't an apology. Not exactly. More like something he needed to say without being asked to." Later that evening, in the solitude of his home office, Jockson unfolded the letter. The handwriting was uneven, not rushed, but not practiced either. It read, "Mr. Jockson, I won't insult you by pretending I didn't know what I was doing. I did. I looked at you and made a decision, not about your taste or your budget, but about your worth. I've done it before. Too many times, and not just with you. I told myself it was business, that I was protecting the brand. But really I was protecting a wall I'd built to feel bigger in a world that kept reminding me I wasn't enough. You exposed that wall, and instead of tearing it down for me, you gave me a hammer and let me decide. I've been watching Annie, the way she leads, the way she listens. She makes people feel seen. I didn't know how rare that was until I realized I'd spent years doing the opposite. You could have fired me. Most would have. But you gave me 30 days. And now I know why that hurt more than a pink slip, because it forced me to stand in what I'd ignored, and to stay until I saw it. Whatever happens after this, thank you not for the second chance, but for the truth." Jackie Jockson stared at the letter for a long while, not because he was unsure how to feel, but because he did. Deeply. And it wasn't pride, it wasn't vindication. It was something quieter, something heavier. It was the awareness that sometimes the most profound justice isn't delivered in punishment, but in the mirror you place in someone's hands, and the choice you give them to look, finally. He thought of his father again, of the man who taught him that dignity is not a gift you're given. It's something you decide to carry, especially when no one else offers it. And he thought of the store, of every person who would walk through those doors not to buy status, but to feel like they belonged. That was always the point, and now it was finally happening. He folded the letter slowly, with care, not to file it away, but to remember. Because on that simple page, Jockson saw what few people ever do. The truth, when faced, doesn't break us, it frees us. The truth about character is that it rarely introduces itself with fanfare. It doesn't arrive with applause or step onto stages. It shows up quietly when no one is watching, especially when you have nothing left to prove and everything left to reveal. Jockson had learned this long ago. In the years between building his first store and standing as the man behind an empire, he had encountered countless people who wore masks crafted from money, position, and pride. Some had earned their roles, others had merely inherited them. But very few had built their character the way they built their resumes, deliberately and with reflection. That morning, he walked back into the store without announcement, entourage, or agenda. He wasn't there to check numbers or enforce policy. He was there to see what remained when the dust had settled, when the spotlight had moved on, and only the echoes of consequence were left behind. The floor was calm. Customers milled through the aisles with gentle purpose. Employees spoke in lowered voices, not out of fear, but attentiveness. Jockson noticed details most wouldn't. How a cashier helped a customer carry a box to the door. How a sales associate asked a child if he wanted to try on a grown-up watch. Just for fun. He turned a corner and saw Jackie near the back, folding store bags with quiet precision and not giving orders or leading anyone, just working. Jackson could have walked away. He could have let the moment slip past like any other hour in a business day. But he didn't. Instead, he approached. Jackie looked up, startled, but not defensive. Not anymore. His hands paused, then steadied. "Good morning," he said. Jackson nodded. "You're still here." Jackie smiled faintly. "I said I would be." There was no tension, no performance, just two men, standing in the same space but on different sides of a lesson life had delivered with surgical precision. "I read your letter," Jackson said. "I meant every word," Jackie replied. "I believe you." That small exchange could have ended there, but something deeper lingered. Jackson sensed it. Not remorse alone, not guilt, but something rarer, accountability without request for reward. He gestured to the nearby chairs, which were meant for waiting customers. "Walk with me," he said. They sat near the large display windows, the kind that once symbolized everything Jackie thought mattered. Clean glass, curated lighting, luxury on display. "I used to think dignity was something people either had or didn't," Jackson said. "But I've come to understand it's more like a muscle. You build it, or you let it atrophy." Jackie listened, not nodding reflexively, not jumping in to speak. Just listened. "I've had years to build mine," Jackson continued, "because I had to. Every room I walked into, I had to decide whether I'd let someone else define who I was. You had a different road, one with fewer questions, maybe, but the same final test." Jackie finally spoke. "And that test is? What do you do when no one's grading you?" They sat in silence for a while. Outside, traffic moved, pedestrians passed. The city churned forward, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding behind a pane of spotless glass. Jackie exhaled. "I've thought about who I was before this. Not just here, in my marriage, with my kids. I don't think I was cruel, but I wasn't curious either. I didn't ask myself if the way I saw the world was limiting me or hurting someone else. I just assumed I was right." Jackson tilted his head, studying him. "Assumptions are dangerous, but they're also invitations." Jackie looked over. "To what?" "To become someone you're not yet." It wasn't praise. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the kind of sentence that stayed with a man long after the conversation ended, like the last line of a novel that refuses to let you go. As Jackson rose to leave, he extended a hand, not as an endorsement, but as a gesture of recognition, a marker of shared humanity. Jackie stood, took it, and for the first time in weeks, felt the weight in his chest begin to shift. Not because things were fixed, but because they were being faced, and he watched from across the room, not intruding, not intervening, and just observing, like she always had. And in her quiet presence, Jackson saw what leadership looked like when no one was performing. Not loud, not demanding, just deeply, profoundly consistent. As he stepped outside, Jackson didn't feel triumphant. He felt better. He felt hopeful. Because in a world where perception so often masks reality, he had just witnessed the rarest thing of all. A man choosing to rebuild his character. Not for applause, not for reputation, but because he finally understood what it meant to be worth more than what he once believed. The truth wasn't new, but it was louder now. It echoed differently in his bones. Jackson had built a brand that graced magazine covers, adorned runways, and impressed people who judged value in carats and cut. Yet what lingered in his memory wasn't the success or the champagne celebrations. It was the sting of being unseen. Not years ago, not once, but yesterday, in his store. and it brought him back, long before polished floors and spotlighted displays, to a gray afternoon in 1987. He had been 17, wearing his one good shirt, sleeves ironed carefully by his mother that morning. He'd saved tips for weeks to buy a watch for his father's birthday, the kind with real weight, not plastic, not pretend. He remembered walking into the department store downtown, the kind with piano music playing softly from speakers embedded in the ceiling, the kind where clerks smiled at certain people and tightened when others entered. He was the other. No one asked if he needed help. When he lingered too long, a security guard circled once, then again, then asked if he was lost. He left without buying anything, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he didn't feel permitted to want it. Years later, when Jackson launched his first store, he swore no one would ever feel that way walking through his doors. He'd make luxury feel human, inclusive, safe, a place where dignity wasn't earned through presentation, but honored by default. But something had shifted. Success had softened the vision. And now, watching one of his employees assume he wasn't the type to afford a watch he'd hand-selected for the collection, Jackson wasn't angry. He was disappointed in himself, because somewhere along the way the brand had become more important than the belief that birthed it. So he decided to start again, not from scratch, but from the soul. That morning, Jackson sent an email to every manager, regional lead, and store director. It wasn't branded, it wasn't beautifully formatted. It was plain text, just his words. He wrote, "We are not in the business of selling status. We are in the business of honoring stories. Each person who walks through our doors brings a lifetime with them. Maybe they're grieving, maybe they're dreaming. They may need to feel visible for 5 minutes of their day. If we can't offer them that, we are not in the business I meant to build." Then he hit send, turned off his phone, and walked into the store as if he were nobody again. He spent the day shadowing, not supervising, and watching, not judging. And what he saw was unexpected. Annie, once overlooked and underestimated, had become the quiet center of gravity. She trained without scolding, corrected without shame, and lifted others without seeking credit. When a customer seemed hesitant, she didn't push. She leaned in, gently. When a child dropped a bracelet from a display, she knelt to pick it up with a smile, not a sigh. She had become what the brand had forgotten: soft power. But the most surprising moment came at 3:17 p.m. Jackson stood near the back when a young man walked in, familiar in the way strangers sometimes are. Faded hoodie, work boots, a plastic bag with a lunchbox inside. No one else noticed him, but Jackie, who had once judged Jackson by his jacket, noticed. He greeted the young man with a handshake, offered him a glass of water, and asked what had brought him in. The man hesitated, then said, "Honestly, sir, I just wanted to see what a $20,000 watch looked like. I don't think I'll ever buy one, but I've been curious for years." Jackie didn't smirk, didn't deflect. He nodded. "Then let's take a look together." And he walked the young man to the display. He opened the case. He let him hold it, explained the craftsmanship, the origin, and the legacy. For 10 whole minutes, they talked, not about money, but about meaning. Jackson watched in silence. His throat tightened. Not because it was perfect, but it was redemption without being asked for. He remembered something his father once told him the night he almost quit college. "Son, don't let the world's opinion of you become your opinion of yourself." Today, watching Jackie pass that truth, silently, unspoken to a stranger, Jackson knew the brand was no longer the story. Character was. Because a logo can open doors, but it's how you treat the person walking through it. That's what keeps it open. The first time Jockson heard his father cry, he was 15 years old. It wasn't a sob, just one sharp breath, held a second too long, then released with a kind of silence that changed the air. They had just left a restaurant after waiting 30 minutes without being seated. 3 different servers had passed them. No menus, no eye contact. But Jockson had noticed something else, how the room buzzed for others. The clinking of glasses, the rhythm of footsteps that skipped their table like it didn't exist. Outside in the parking lot, his father wiped his hands on his jeans as if trying to erase something invisible. Sometimes, he said, it's not about what they say, it's what they don't. Years later, Jockson still remembered that silence. It taught him something that no business school ever could. You don't judge a place by its walls or its windows. You judge it by how it makes the forgotten feel remembered. He thought of that moment as he stood in the doorway of his store. Not to inspect, not to enforce, but to observe the human atmosphere his brand had become. It wasn't enough to change policies. What mattered now was culture. Lived, not laminated. There was a woman near the entrance, the late 60s, her cardigan buttoned to the top. She strolled, fingertips grazing the edge of a glass display, as if testing whether she belonged. A young staff member approached, not with forced cheer, but with genuine stillness. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" he asked. She blinked. "Just looking." "No rush," he said. "Take your time. Let me know if you want company or quiet." It was a small thing, the kind of thing most people might miss. But Jockson saw it. Not customer service, human fluency. The instinct to read not just the body language, but the emotional landscape of a stranger. Later he watched the same staff member assist a corporate client. No script, no shift in tone. Just care, offered evenly. Jockson knew then what he'd hoped for but hadn't dared assume. The store wasn't just selling luxury again. It was practicing equality. And that kind of culture? It doesn't come from incentives. It comes from the kind of people you hire, and the sort of people you keep. He remembered asking Annie once during her promotion why she had never spoken up when things felt off. Her answer stayed with him. "Because I thought it would cost me more to care than to comply." And yet, when given the chance, she didn't just rise, she brought others with her. What had changed wasn't the logo, it was the lens. Leadership had shifted from performance to presence. The people on the floor were no longer reciting brand lines. They were becoming the brand. Still, Jockson needed to know if this shift was fundamental or rehearsed, so he tried something no one expected. He returned to the store unannounced, this time not in disguise, but also not as the boss, just a man, alone. No one alerted the staff, no one briefed them, no one knew he was coming. He entered just as the rain began. His coat was damp, his hair a little disheveled. A quiet Wednesday afternoon. A woman at the front, new, young, offered a smile before saying anything. "Welcome in," she said softly. "We're glad you're here. Can I help you with something? Are you here to shop? Just, we're glad you're here." It was 5 words, but it echoed louder than any mission statement he'd ever written. He wandered the store, testing edges. He asked odd questions. Paused in places most clients didn't. No one rushed him. No one redirected him to more affordable options. No one studied his coat for signs of value. He stood in front of a display case, not touching, just thinking, when an associate approached. "Beautiful piece," the associate said. "There's a story behind that one if you'd like to hear it." Jockson smiled, just barely. "Sure." The story was thoughtful. No jargon, no pressure to purchase, just a narrative, generously given, as if this conversation was its kind of transaction, one of respect. When Jockson left that day, no one followed him out, no manager scrambled to explain. And that was perfect, because the most significant measure of a place is not how it treats the powerful, it's how it treats the quiet ones, the ones who enter carrying nothing but their story, hoping it will be met with gentleness, not judgment. A brand can earn loyalty, but only people can gain trust. And Jockson knew without a press release, without a camera, without a crowd. The trust had returned. The boy at the window wasn't shopping. That much was clear. He had the kind of stillness that doesn't come from hesitation, but from habit, the learned choreography of keeping your distance, so no one has to tell you to step back. Jockson noticed him the moment he turned the corner. Maybe it was the way the boy's hands stayed in his pockets, elbows close, like he'd taught himself not to take up space. Or perhaps it was the look in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and quiet permission-seeking, like he needed to check if it was okay to admire something he'd been told wasn't made for him. The rain had just stopped, leaving the sidewalk glazed and the glass displays streaked with reflections of the afternoon light. Jockson paused, watching from across the street, the image of the boy frozen in a posture he recognized far too well. He had been that boy once. It had been decades since Jockson stood in front of a display and felt like he didn't belong there. Not because anyone said it out loud, but because everything around him whispered it in coded language, through looks, through silence, through the way some doors opened wider for others. So now he didn't hesitate. He crossed the street and stood beside the boy. Neither spoke. They just looked at the watches gleaming behind the glass, at the curated symbols of success and belonging. "You got a favorite?" Jockson asked casually. The boy blinked, startled, then shrugged. "Dunno. They all look expensive." Jockson nodded. "They are." The boy laughed, not bitterly, just with the kind of realism that comes from knowing certain things weren't built with you in mind. "Figures," he said. "I'm just looking." "Nothing wrong with looking," Jockson replied. "Sometimes that's where dreaming starts." The boy tilted his head. "You work here or something?" Jockson smiled. "Something like that." What followed wasn't a grand gesture. There was no camera, no press, no speech. Jockson opened the door and said, "Come on, let's go in." The boy hesitated, instinctively looking down at his hoodie, his sneakers, both worn, both honest. "I ain't dressed for a place like that." Jockson didn't laugh, didn't reassure him with a cliché. He just said, "Neither was I once. Turns out, clothes don't carry as much weight as people think. It's the way you carry yourself that lasts longer." They stepped inside together. The staff didn't stare. No one stiffened. That in itself was a kind of triumph. Quiet, earned, but real. Annie, standing near the back, caught Jockson's eye, nodded once, and turned to continue helping a customer. She didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. The new culture didn't require declarations. It lived in the unspoken things. The boy ambled through the store, still hesitant, but no longer invisible. Jockson stayed a step behind, offering space, but not distance. "This one's cool," the boy said, pointing to a brushed steel timepiece. "Looks strong." "It is," Jockson said. "Takes craftsmanship to build something that lasts." The boy looked up. "People don't think someone like me notices stuff like that." "Well," Jockson replied, "then maybe they need to start noticing better." When they left the store, the sky had cleared. The street shimmered in late sun. Jockson reached into his coat and handed the boy a folded card. "If you're ever interested in learning how these are made, we've got a mentorship program design, engineering, marketing, whatever you want to explore. The boy stared at the card, as if it might disappear. You serious? As a storm, Jockson said, and those come often. Best learn to stand in them. The boy walked away slowly, not like someone escaping, but someone remembering the feel of being welcomed, for the first time in a long time. Back inside the store, one of the newer associates approached Jockson. Was that someone important? Jockson considered the question, then answered, He is now. Later that night, as he sat in his office, Jockson looked at the original mission statement framed on the wall. It spoke of innovation, prestige, global reach, all true. But what mattered more, what had always mattered more, was what never made it onto the marble or the marketing materials, that no one should ever feel measured by fabric or footwear. A person's worth lies not in how they walk in, but in how they are received. That wealth has nothing to do with what you wear, and everything to do with how you treat those who have less to give and more to lose. Respect, Jockson knew, wasn't something you earned by looking the part. It was something you gave because you saw the person, not the packaging. And that kind of brand, it doesn't fade with fashion, it endures. Jockson didn't return to expose anyone. He returned to rediscover whether kindness still lived where his name once built a brand. What he found was painful, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. A quiet glance, a lowered tone, a judgment made before a word was spoken. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who's ever been unseen because of the color of their skin or the clothes they wore. But instead of anger, he chose something more complicated. Empathy. Instead of punishment, he offered reflection. He believed that what people wear shouldn't define their worth, and that respect isn't a privilege to be earned, but a right to be honored. Through one man's silence and another's growth, we saw what change looks like. Not loud or showy, but steady and human. Jockson's story reminds us that true luxury isn't in marble floors or platinum watches. It's in how we treat those we once overlooked. If this story moved you, hold on to that feeling. Let it guide how you greet strangers, how you listen, and how you lead. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if this story touched your heart or stirred something inside you, remember to like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, meaningful stories just like this. I genuinely look forward to reading your comments. Every word you share is a spark that fuels me to keep creating better stories. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me and for listening attentively throughout our conversation.